In the past few days, I've had the pleasure of playing and beating Shadow of the Erdtree. Overall, I thought it was a great expansion, fantastic even. There are a few things that I would change, but I might talk about those in a later video as that's not really what I want to get into today. Today I want to talk about difficulty, and this is something that's been on the community's mind the past few days. I want to talk about how difficulty and our perception towards it can really change within the first week or two of a new Souls game's release. And I really want to talk about my experience with the base game for Elden Ring and how my reflection on that experience really shaped my expectations and my interaction with Shadow of the Erdtree. I'm what I would call an objective-focused gamer. I typically enjoy games that give me some clear objective to overcome, something to do, things to check off, just something to essentially beat. This means I'm less likely to enjoy games like Minecraft, for example, where they're usually just open world and you're free to do whatever you want. I like Elden Ring because it's a little bit of a mix, because I can explore the world, but also I always have an objective or something to work towards. What this means for me as an objective-focused player, though, is that I typically tend to rush through games to get to the objectives so I can clear them. That generally means that I'm usually one of the first people to play or 100% games as they come out. I 100%ed Sekiro within the first 3 days. I had beaten it 5 times within the first 3 days of its release. With Elden Ring, I had 100%ed it, I think, after day like 7. I was taking my time a little bit. But the point is that I tend to rush through these experiences, not because I'm actually trying to rush, but because the enjoyment of a game to me is beating it, is finishing the objective, is accomplishing something. Here's where we get into the discussion of Souls games and Elden Ring. With the Dark Souls trilogy, the idea of being objective focused is in clear alignment with the design philosophy of the game. You have a generally very specific path that you're supposed to go down so you can beat bosses in a generally specific order. Yes, you can go out of those orders, but it's pretty clear when you're underleveled or you're not supposed to be somewhere, so you generally get put back on that path. With Elden Ring, things completely shifted. They gave you an open world and essentially told you to go wherever you wanted. And for me, this was a little confusing because now I didn't always know where I was supposed to go, or when I came across something that I thought was my next objective, I wasn't always sure if I was supposed to just keep beating my head against it or go and do something else. So oftentimes I would just beat my head against it. I would fight the same boss 50 to 100 times until I beat them, even if I was underleveled or didn't have my weapon leveled up all the way. And that's just because as an objective-focused player, that's my satisfaction with these types of games, is finding the thing that I'm supposed to beat, then beating it, even if it's difficult. This shaped my mentality and my opinion of Elden Ring the first time that I played it, because I was usually finding myself underleveled and underprepared for the zones that I was attempting to beat when I got to them. As an example, when I beat Elden Ring for the first time, when I cleared the Elden Beast, I was level 94, which isn't super underleveled, but that's pretty far underleveled compared to where most people finish the game, which is typically in the 120s and 130s. A really big wall for me the first few days Elden Ring was out was Malekith the Black Blade. Everything in the game up until that point had been hard, but nothing seemed insurmountable. I got to Malekith though, and everything changed. Suddenly, I couldn't beat this boss. I was there for at least 8 hours. I think it was the only boss that I had to go to bed to wake up the next day to fight. And by the time that I beat Malekith, I didn't feel a sense of satisfaction. I felt a sense of relief that the boss was finally over. And for me, at the time, I thought that meant there was something fundamentally wrong with Malekith. I thought that meant that he was a badly designed boss. But as I've played Elden Ring more, and as I've come to appreciate the mechanics of the game more, and the world and the things that we're allowed to use within that world, Malekith is now my favorite boss, and I think any Souls game. When I first fought Malekith, I thought he was too aggressive. I thought he was too powerful. He was doing too much damage. In fact, I thought everything in Farum Azula up was doing too much damage. He had too many combos. I was getting one shot or two shot, and if I wasn't getting one shot or two shot, he had strings of combos that were just deleting me at the time. And I think this is a problem that a lot of people face when they first come across Malekith, because he is aggressive, he is powerful, he's designed to be the boss who is the killer of other gods wielding destined death. But he's also very beatable, and his attacks aren't actually as bad as you think they are once you fundamentally understand how they work and what causes them to do what they do. An example is he has this attack where he jumps and then he stabs the sword into the ground and then it does a little bit of an explosion or a multi-slash thing, I can't remember. But there's a way to get free damage off of that if you run away so that he does a flip. So he'll follow up the ground stab with a flip and then you can run behind him and get a couple hits in. This is one of those things that I thought was really interesting because it caused you to start thinking outside of the box when you were fighting this boss. It was no longer just dodge the attack, get your hit in, dodge the attack, get the hit in. Now you actually had to start paying attention to the mechanics the boss was using, as well as how their strings connected to each other within the combos that they were using. And this is something that the older Souls games really didn't do. A lot of them just had boss attack into a string, then they would stop that string. They might do like one occasional follow-up every now and then, but most of the time they were pretty independent and they didn't really make you think. Like, you just kind of got to dodge the attack, and if you were good at dodging, blocking, or parrying, you were fine. But Elden Ring treats it much more like an actual fight. The bosses almost have a sense of autonomy to them, where they're able to understand your actions and how you're reacting to things, and now you have to be able to react to their reactions to your movement. So if they see you rolling around all over the place, they're going to hold their attack and then hit you. This was something that I really didn't appreciate when Elden Ring first came out. I thought it was too hard. I thought it was too difficult. I realized later, though, that Elden Ring was never too difficult. I just hadn't adapted my mindset away from the Dark Souls trilogy or Sekiro or the other games to adapt to this new playstyle that was required, to adapt to this new mentality that the bosses are aware of the things we're doing and can react to those things instead of just throwing out attacks that we can freely punish. This is something that I had to catch myself when I started thinking similar thoughts to what I had towards Malekith as I was playing Shadow of the Erdtree. Around the third or fourth major story boss, I started to get this feeling of, is this too hard? Is this too difficult? I am someone who considers myself a Souls veteran. You know, I've played every Souls game and beaten them and 100% most of them. And I found myself thinking, is this too difficult? Is the average person going to be able to do this? And then I had to stop and think back to how my perceptions changed after fighting Malekith, after learning the game more, after playing through it a few more times and really gaining that appreciation. And what really dawned on me was that I didn't have the appreciation for the greatness that was there at the moment because I was in the midst of being frustrated and finding it difficult because I didn't understand the boss patterns and I didn't understand why I was getting one shot or two shot. And then I had to just do what I did in the base game, which was either decide if I want to bang my head against something that's really difficult or if I want to change my perspective and go do something else. The DLC is entirely balanced around the Erdtree fragments, where you can go and get more, massively increase your offense and defense, and then come back and fight whatever you want. I've been watching streamers play the game, and it's been really surprising to me how some of them with their different builds are going through the bosses in different order. For example, some of the last bosses that I fought were some of the first ones that others fought. I think Jacksepticeye, for example, fought, I'm not going to spoil it, but a very large dragon as one of the first bosses in his playthrough. And to me, that was really surprising because I think that was the last boss that I fought in my Shadow of the Erdtree playthrough. And it was still difficult for me at the time, despite it being easy for him and him not having many of these Erdtree fragments. And that also gave me the perspective that our builds, how we approach fights, the stats that we have, the strategies we're using during these fights, such as, just jump attack spamming. These are all things that are really important and going to shape our perceptions on how difficult things are. If you use spirit summons, you probably are going to find the expansion a little bit less difficult. I don't personally use spirit summons. I don't personally use normal summons. It's not my preferred way of playing. And that's another reason why it's hard for me to critique the difficulty of Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree, because I'm not using those tools that were given to me. But ultimately, the game should be able to be beaten without these things, and it still can. What I'm really getting at here, though, is that when we are approaching new content, new Souls games, we often have the mindset of things are too difficult because we don't understand them yet, and we don't understand the design vision or the way that we're supposed to approach these bosses and how we're supposed to interact with them. For example, Rolana, when I'm fighting her, at first it was very frustrating to me that her attack chains felt like they went on forever. Like I'd think that I was going to have a time to punish, and then she would just keep attacking. But what I eventually realized is that her strings were just much, much longer than the average bosses, and I would actually get my time to punish if I just kept dodging or blocking at the correct moments. And specifically, learning to block at the end of her block string usually allows you a very strong guard counter that you can punish her with so that you can get some sort of being punished off her. She also spends a lot of time doing nothing when she's phase transitioning or she's preparing her big ultimate attacks. And there's a lot of these different types of things that you're going to find when you're interacting with the bosses in the expansion, when you're interacting with this content, is that you have to think outside of the box instead of just dodge attack, dodge attack. What big openings can you abuse? What strategies are the bosses using that you can adapt to so that you can get damage in very specific ways? I think one of the best examples of this in the base game is Godfrey. Godfrey is a boss that stomps the ground, and then he has these big attacks that you can jump over and get damage on him. And I thought that was actually genius game design for Elden Ring, which is the first Souls game that you can jump in. Ultimately, the point that I'm trying to get at in this video and in this discussion is that yes, Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree are very hard, but you have a lot of different options available to you. And the most important thing you can do if you want to succeed and beat bosses and not be frustrated is to shift your mentality around how you approach these things. Start thinking about the bosses and enemies in such a way that you're not trying to play Dark Souls 1, that you're not trying to play an old Souls game where you can just block and dodge and then counter hit. You have to start thinking about the enemies as enemies. They are not just mindless AI who are going to do the same thing over and over again that you're going to be able to freely punish forever. You also have 1,000 different options you can use for dealing with every single boss. You can fight them at level 1, you can fight them at level 200, you can have one Erdtree fragment, you can have all of them. These are all things that are going to allow you to succeed or not succeed and play in your own way. You can use spirit summons, you can not use spirit summons. The design philosophy that Elden Ring really pushes, I think, is that they want you to be able to overcome a challenge ultimately in the way that you feel like you want to. You can use anything in your arsenal that you like to overcome a challenge, and it should be possible. But you also need to be able to adapt to the challenge that is being given to you. You're not just going to be able to bash your head against the wall as easily as you could in the old Soul games because things are inherently much harder now, which is why they gave you more options. So, yes, Shadow of the Erdtree is difficult, and I understand why people are frustrated with it, and I understand why they think that it is too hard for them or that they're not going to be able to beat it. But ultimately, I think that you have the tools and that you have the ability to overcome these things if you shift your mindset to understand the design philosophy of these bosses, these enemies, and the tools that are in the world for you to utilize. Thanks for watching.